Thank you so much, Emma, and welcome everybody. Really kind of excited to get this series kicked off and talk all about all the things about operational technology security and the integration of IT security with that. Really delighted that our partner Trinity OT is joining us for this session. I'd like to introduce Ed. Ed, would you like to give a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm very excited to be here to talk to you today. I'm a longtime partner with Trinity and have a lot of almost 20 years of experience specifically around operational technology in terms of assessing technologies for industries across pretty much all of the OT landscape. So I'm really interested to share some stories with you about what I've experienced over time. And my experience goes all the way back to military work with the U.S. government, specifically in the Navy and the Air Force, and building protections for OT systems there, and also work with GCHQ over there in the UK. So excited to share my experiences with everybody in the audience today.
Great. I know you've got some good stories, Ed, and really looking forward to hearing those. So I am Dominic Carroll, Director of Product Marketing at E3 Assure. So E3 Assure, we are a SOC as a service provider delivering advanced threat detection response for organisations of all shapes and sizes, particularly strong in government defence, critical national infrastructure. So I've been doing technical service and product development for about 20 years, and the last 10 years of those have been in pure play cybersecurity services with a strong focus on managed services. But let's talk about what we're going to run through today. So we're going to get everyone on a solid foundation, make sure we're all on the same page about operational technology, what it is, look into the kind of threats in that particular arena, what that means in terms of particular blind spots, to kind of get ahead of in that world. Obviously, the key theme today is about asset management, so we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on that, and then kind of show how that can support getting on top and ahead of a lot of the upcoming regulation and directives, particularly that are happening at the moment in the EU and the UK. So let's start with some fundamentals, operational technology 101. So it can mean a few things, different things to different people, and there's a few categories and sections of that. So let's grab ourselves some shared definitions. And then obviously, when we're kind of classic operational technology, we're talking about the systems, tend to actually do things in the physical world and control those things, particularly in industrial manufacturing, utilities, that kind of thing. Closely aligned to that and often integrated with that is the industrial Internet of Things, which are again sensors picking up signals which may deliver data to those control systems. And also, we've got enterprise Internet of Things. It kind of looks similar on the surface, but often the intent is different. But they can feed into the overall operational technology model. How did I do, Ed? Does that kind of catch it all?
Absolutely, and there's a lot of differences, and it's changing over time here as we go through with all new technologies coming out in the IT world that are kind of showing up in the OT space, and we'll talk about some of that today.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of get the distinctions understood, because it's not necessarily a one size fits all security model. Even when we're kind of talking about OT as a concept separate to IT, they kind of all started to converge. So getting on that journey, obviously, a lot of what we do is taking our customers on a journey of maturity that we're kind of used to. I think in the OT world, it kind of runs the staged outcomes differ somewhat, and certainly the timescales of getting to where you want to be. And I think it's a difference in a lot of organisations about where they are on that maturity scale in the IT world versus the OT world. So what we're going to talk about today, I said, is all about asset management, and this is episode 1, and that kind of aligns to asset control, which tends to be the first step on that journey. So kind of getting on top of your operational technology security, and it's about discovering and knowing what assets you've got, creating baselines so that you can do some anomaly alerting. And over the coming weeks, a couple of months, we're going to be kind of delving into, once you got on top of assets, what can you do next with kind of more sophisticated approaches to threat detection, threat intelligence integration, and then even in terms of reaching for the stars, once you've done your crawl, walk, run journey, What can we do to integrate kind of more response actions? That'd be a discussion around the art of the possible and new capabilities that are coming on board today. Does that kind of represent the type of journey you kind of experienced customers going on, Ed? And kind of
absolutely, and we're starting in the place that's probably the most critical to making sure that the rest of those are successful. Because if you don't know what you have, and you don't know what it's doing, then it's it's impossible to protect it. There are just too many places for things to happen. So we're, the places that I've gone, especially in industries that have been established for a long time, they have legacy systems that have been there for a very long time, and the diagrams that they have represent what it looked like when they started, but it doesn't represent what's there today. So this piece is extremely important, and to be able to build any kind of protection and mitigation strategy for these systems.
Yeah, and I think can be quite a bit of complexity in there. So having some mental models, I think, is really important. And we can't really talk about then operational technology security without talking about the purging model. Now, I've been kind of getting over the past couple of years investigating this and kind of understanding what it is. There's points of view that says it's more of a network topology, and some say no, it's more of a kind of it's a framework for understanding risk and kind of where you need to apply certain types of security controls in different areas. And it's
a little bit of all those things, right?
Yeah.
But it gives us a way to talk about where things lie in the way that processes work in these cyber physical systems, right? Versus what we've traditionally looked at from an IT perspective as information moving around the organization and protecting that information. This really gets down to the basic capabilities of systems that are out there and describes it. And when we talk about the protections and we talk about asset detection, we talk about all the things related to security here, this gives us a common framework to be able to really start to build in and talk about how you layer in protections into this environment and mitigate the risks associated at various levels. And one of the things I'm very fond of talking about, traditionally, when we talk about security, we talk about building barriers to keeping people out, right? So firewalls, things like technologies that provide authentication capabilities, and really drive kind of a top-down approach to protecting systems, and that's really important. And we see that here with a plant demilitarized zone, firewalls to help protect those environments and build segmentation. But you'll hear me talk a lot about providing a more bottoms-up approach. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about going down into the physical processes themselves, up to the process controls, the controllers that are out there, and the HMIs. These things are not built for cybersecurity. They're built for operational efficiency, but they now make us vulnerable in critical infrastructure, and we need to be able to go in and effectively protect this. So we talk about security and how we lay this in here and the enclaves associated with the different levels here within this model. So it's important to understand this when you're talking about this with anybody, with everybody from management to the technical folks, to make sure that people understand where things are and how they work.
Yes, I mean that's kind of like really fascinating to me, because obviously those control area zones, those three areas of HMI, process control, physical process, they look very much like a do not touch type of environment.
Absolutely.
But they need to communicate with the operations and control, and likewise there's things in the DMZs that will kind of want to talk to those and need to talk to the outside world. So getting that understanding of what's talking to what and what's allowed and what's normal, I think this is creates a really good approach to helping all kinds of people understand. It's good architecture for the auditors and boards to kind of have a narrative that kind of links technical segmentation to business risk and regulatory compliance and safety impacts. So rather be
absolutely, and it's changing over time here as people want to put new technologies in place that are cloud-based versus on-premises, and this gives you, this model gives you a way of addressing how you can make that happen in a secure way. so that you're not leaving yourself vulnerable to possible attacks.
Great. Yeah, that's a really kind of important foundational concept. Okay, let's take a look at some of the kind of threats to that. So obviously, it's operational technology, not a new thing, but I think the landscape is shifting somewhat. So these are some numbers that pull together, and there's some the kind of well, I'll take these one at a time because the first one, I I come from a primarily an IT security background and I've been doing OT for the last kind of 18 months, couple of years, but if in the IT world 40% of cyber attacks caused operational disruption, that would be significant just because of the sheer volume of attacks that we're used to kind of on the internet perimeter and in the IT world. So how does that play out then in the OT world? What's happening there?
Well, in the OT world, what that means is, first of all, these numbers are probably low. Because we don't have the visibility in place in most of these systems to even tell when we're having an event happening, right? More and not and to take it all the way to the incident response that we have associated with it. A lot of people don't have plans in place to even deal with these things. The other part of that is that this is basic, these statistics are based on people actually reporting what's going on, right? And in general, people are not willing to share outside their business, what's going on. And so I would say that these numbers are low. And it's critical to see that that middle statistic there, 52 days, that's probably even low too for how long it takes to even detect that something's going on within your system. I'll give you a quick example. I do a lot of work in the wastewater treatment area, and I was talking with a customer, and they were describing a problem to me where there are historian data associated with their operational systems, which basically records everything that happens within their OT environment normally on a day-to-day basis, suddenly was missing 12 hours of data. And the reason for that was that their clock mechanism, suddenly their GPS clock was basically skipped from AM to PM, and they lost an entire, basically half a day worth of data.
Oh no!
Now they looked at that as a mechanical failure. Turns out that someone was spoofing their GPS, and basically that 12-hour window left a 12-hour window for an adversary to do something to the system without having any record of it happening. So you look at this from a perspective of, you have nation states that are pulling these kinds of attacks on things like water, power, critical infrastructure in general, as well as just nefarious people who are doing things like ransomware attacks and wanting to monetize the situation and the incident. Those kind of things are fairly simple to pull off, and if you don't have the protections and visibility, particularly into what's going on within the environment, that's a critical area for you to not really have an idea of what's going on within your environment. So,
wow, that's fascinating with the kind of GPS spoofing and how that can go unnoticed. Obviously, the kind of key thing there is that's the 52 days, because you can't detect what you can't see if you're not looking for those things.
Absolutely,
you have everything interlinked with intelligence as to what's going on, to kind of recognize those signals within your environment. And I mean that kind of 50 days and the 1.117 million came from some research we've commissioned. We've got a report coming out, and that's obviously kind of a subsection of the kind of UK stakeholder group. It's interesting also to see NCSC reporting 129% increase in nation state attacks that they've had to handle. Because that's not marginal. That's not like more than doubling in a single year. So there's definitely plenty going on out there. And just to kind of back that up a bit, this is from the latest kind of WEF Global Cybersecurity outlook report for 2026. Obviously, what's going on at the moment in Davos. But again, the points, the top one and the third row on that chart in terms of, business leaders, political leaders concerned about geopolitically motivated cyber attacks on, critical national infrastructure, and the convergence of IT, OT, robotics, etc. Sounds like a perfect storm there. It's kind of, if nation, is geopolitically motivated and funded or supported cyber attacks, and they're going after, where these kind of threat vectors might kind of be exposed. So there's a lot to kind of take into consideration, and I'm to be seeing more in the media around that. Obviously, it's becoming much more of a mainstream concern. It seems to be top of everybody's agenda. But kind of some of the threat actors and some of the kind of malware we're seeing out there kind of put their bounce site and vault sites. From the work you're doing, Ed, is any particular ones that stand out that kind of speak to these type of articles, what we're seeing from the threat actor groups?
The thing that you notice, and this is becoming, as you said, more public to people, right? Is that we're seeing the shift from IT-oriented attacks, where we've done a lot of work across the globe in terms of trying to provide hardening capabilities to these systems for IT, where we're protecting information. The attacks are starting to move, for geopolitical reasons, among others, to the soft, gooey middle, I call it, which is where these OT systems are, because they can get a very large impact by affecting a very small system, and do a lot of damage both in the physical world and in the data world through attacks that attack things that are just not as protected as our IT systems are. And I would say the second thing is that the proliferation of data that we move from the IoT world to into the IT world for things as simple as billing. We had an attack here in the United States that attacked a oil and gas pipeline on the East Coast here in the U.S. And basically the attack was on the IT side of the equation, but there was not adequate protections to guarantee that the people couldn't progress from the IT side over to the OT side. So they ended up shutting down a major pipeline that caused gas lines and basically 2 weeks of disruption to the East Coast in terms of providing fuel, because they couldn't guarantee that things were protected. Now, after research, we found out that the main reason they did that was that they shut it down because they couldn't bill effectively, because the financial part of the system was the part that was attacked. But it highlighted why the landscape has changed here. You have to look at more than just the IT functions that are going on when these attacks happen. You have to look at how they attach to the OT world and what they affect in the real world physically.
Yeah, I mean, that's we talked about blind spots, and that's kind of what we're going to look at next.
Absolutely.
In terms of how that plays out in the real world. So, obviously, key things to comment on here. Obviously, lack of visibility monitoring. That's what we're going to delve into in a bit more detail in the next part of this presentation. But obviously, there's other areas, in terms of they're very different between OT and IT world. So, the ability to kind of apply patches, systems with life cycles that are kind of way beyond what we'd see in the IT world, and obviously, as we talked about, the convergence. So, in terms of how that's played out in your experience, is there any kind of commentary you'd like to add to that?
Well, yeah, we call that greenfield versus brownfield. We have new things which are a little easier to apply the more typical security solutions that we have in the IT world, because we're updating networks and we're doing things, using newer technologies. But the reality is that most of these systems are legacy environments or have a legacy piece that are very expensive to change. You think about looking at the power industry.
Yeah.
oil and gas, even water. Many of these systems have been in place for decades, and the cost associated with doing a complete refresh on that technology is very difficult to for most people to be able to pay for. So, in most of my experiences, it's a mix of those systems, and the legacy environments in particular. You're dealing with old versions of software that can't be updated without updating a bunch of other things at the same time. So patching doesn't become as simple as, hey, just turn it on automatically and let it run. It would actually affect operations if you didn't update something. If you updated something and didn't know what the impact of that update was going to be. So I've been in places where I still see Windows 98 running as far back as that, because people just don't want to touch the system, right? And those create blind spots that if you don't have visibility and you haven't done anything to isolate it, they can use vulnerabilities that are available in those systems to really cause a lot of damage very quickly. So, and the other part I'd say is air gaps don't exist. The in almost every in probably 99% of the places I've been that tell me that they're air gapped, we can very quickly show, through patching, through third-party access, through people making mistakes on the systems. These systems are not air gapped, and it's just not reasonable anymore to say that I'm protected. And a little later on, I'll give you an example of a ship system that is a great example of people who thought they were protected because their ships were out on the ocean, but they weren't. Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you said about the cost of changing things. Obviously, investment cases for these, typically there might be 20 years, 30-year business cases attached to these. So taking things
Absolutely.
down every couple of weeks, 6 months is just not really an option, is it?
Nope, not really. No.
Okay, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about the technology differences in between the IT and the OT world, but I think this is also an interesting one from a cultural perspective. We've got the CIA triad in the IT world. It's called confidentiality, integrity, availability, where confidentiality is the kind of core priority, protecting people's data, keeping it safe, stopping it from being exfiltrated and ransomware, protecting intellectual property, etc. Obviously, in the OT world, it's availability and safety that are the core concerns. Have you had to deal with competing priorities within teams and similar organizations where you're trying to take them on a journey, and had any challenges with that?
Well, absolutely, and availability can be your friend and it can be your enemy too, because you in an OT world you can't just take systems down to do things like updating things, and the equipment that's in those environments tends to be very sensitive to other things that are happening within the ecosystem of those environments. Meaning that a controller, let's say, that's out there controlling a process for let's just say opening a valve or closing a valve or doing something like that, that valve has very high pressure, high temperature, physical things that can be both dangerous to people, but also, in the oil and gas world, we use that as an example, is producing something that has to feed a process down the road. People on the operational side are not willing to just shut that down every time you want to do a patch or you want to do something to update the system. And for good reason. It costs a lot of money in a lot of cases to shut down a process and start the process over again. So you end up having windows in place that you can do things from a security perspective, but availability always wins, right? Because that's where the money is being generated for business. That's where the product is being created for whatever the services that you're doing to the public or to your customers. So you end up with a competing set of things. You want to make the system more available by making it more secure, but you can't make it more secure unless you can take some systems down and do some things to change things, and that brings up some conflict between the IT side and the OT side, but also within the operations teams themselves in terms of the priorities associated with that. So
yeah, I guess kind of to circle back and underpinning decisions made around that. You really need a confident, clear view of the assets that are in that environment before you can make any decisions on what you're going to do. So let's get into some of the detail then around asset management. So this is an interesting view for me because obviously in the IT world, assets tend to be quite common across industries. You've got cloud assets, desktops, users, accounts, and it's the software and the processes that might kind of differ between industries. But here, it's the actual physical assets themselves, the control systems, which can kind of different outcomes depending on the industry it's in. And obviously, attaching that then to enterprise OT and industrial Internet of Things, it's kind of assessing the risk, assessing the potential outcomes of any threats. I guess takes a different.
Absolutely.
There's no standard process, I guess.
Well, there are. I mean, there's frameworks that have been developed to help you look at the security controls and things that you have in place for the OT world, and I'm kind of fond of saying that a controller is a controller is a controller. I mean, the major manufacturers of process logic controllers for these different environments, it's the same technologies just being applied in a slightly different way for whatever industry that you're in. So there are commonalities that make it where you can say, hey, I can look across all these different industries that are listed here and say there's just common problems that we have because they've all grown up kind of the same way. Organically, they put a controller in to make some process automated. What we don't have then, and it isn't shared across these, is the visibility into what those systems are actually doing. So a lot of work is being done right now to take data that's been collected in these environments about everything down to the physical signals that are going, analog and digital signals that are going out to the devices that are actually moving, the robots, the arms that are going up and down, whatever it is that process does, and collect that information and use it to be able to normalize what the system is doing on a normal basis, right? So that I can start to detect what's happening when it's not running effectively. And it's interesting that the side effect of that is that cyber is only part of that. You also start to get a better visibility into what the system is actually doing and how it's doing it. And operational efficiency becomes an extremely important part of that. So I make a case for a lot of companies that, if they could improve their physical processes, cyber physical processes, even by 1 to 5%, and get cybersecurity basically for nothing out of that because they're now getting visibility into the assets and what they're doing out there on the system. It's a great way to show an ROI for something where typically when you invest in cybersecurity, you're not looking for a return on investment, you're looking for protection, right? And it gives you a way to basically get both and show some value to the operations people.
Great stuff. Yes, and I guess that and obviously the purging model that we looked at helps kind of provides that commonality of categorization of assets as well. Even
Absolutely.
though the business process might be different between them. So in terms of getting that asset visibility, obviously the key one is being able to understand what's out there without interfering within the kind of the OT process themselves, that kind of disrupting traffic. So passive monitoring becomes key, having sensors that can kind of interpret that traffic correctly and then do that behavioral baselining as to what's kind of normal and correct behavior in that environment. Is there any other approach? I mean, what are the risks to doing kind of active monitoring, for example?
Yes. So controllers are notoriously not happy about people scanning them for like we might traditionally scan a IT network. So things like tools like Nmap and there's a whole host of tools that you can use to basically do broad sweeps on your network to look and see where you have openings that people might be able to use. And the controller world, literally, you can take the controller down by doing that. So we need to think a little bit differently in terms of how we use sensors in the asset space for OT environments to make sure that we're not doing something that's going to, as you say, bring the system down and affect operations in any way. And this is where you get a lot of pushback from the operations people because they're worried that you're going to do exactly that to the system. So passive approaches are very good. What they do is they basically sit on the side of the network that's running these devices and allow you to collect information about what is communicating and what protocols and things that they're communicating over, and give you a view of, this device should never be talking outside the network. Why is it suddenly reaching the Far East and chatting out when it shouldn't be, right? So the visibility is part of that, but you use that visibility to say, okay, now I'm going to start to create, and it's called zero trust now environments where we can now say this device should only be talking to this other device, and it should only be doing it over these particular protocols, and it should never be doing anything other than that. Alert me to when that's happening if it is, and then the next step is to actually isolate it so that it can't speak anywhere else out of that. So so the sensors that we put in place now have to combine, really, in my mind, passive approaches to this, but also there's some things that just never talk on the network unless it's really important, and a passive approach won't necessarily detect that. So what I've been using for the last 5 or 6 years is and I would have never said this 10 years ago, is I'll do a directed active approach to certain parts of the network because I know there's areas that we can't get visibility from a passive perspective. But it has to be very controlled, right? So that we're not doing broad things that may bring the control process down.
Excellent. Okay, let's have a look at what that kind of asset management can look like in real life. So this is the upcoming release of our kind of Cumulo SOC management platform, and we have obviously demo capability. This is obviously what you see here is a kind of typical SOC dashboard, but obviously it's not typical in the sense of what we kind of got out there. So what we have in this environment here is our kind of appliance that's doing the passive monitoring within the OT environment. So we've got kind of an Ember OT as a technology partner of ours, sensor on the appliance. We're doing look at network traffic. Got snort reels as well, looking at the looking for signals of incorrect network behavior as well as Zeek, and we got log parsers that can take information from firewalls and sysmon and other IT type and network component devices environment. So at a dashboard level, it kind of gives us a bit of a purview view. I'll just kind of expand that. So we see it full screen, and obviously we've got the kind of the purview levels with what the assets we're seeing in kind of that model. Let me just take the flow traffic off a second. There we go. So for example, in the layer 3, we can have a look. It sees an asset here. It's identified it as a historian. So that's a combination of doing the passive monitoring of the network traffic, taking all that in, and then using the intelligence we've kind of developed in our system to identify it. And if it spots things that have a particular risk identified to it, can at a dashboard level give you that view. We can kind of drill into that further. So obviously, in terms of an asset management capability, you kind of want to kind of look at, okay, let's look at what we have. So again, looking along the purview model here, we can see how many assets in each level. So if we kind of isolate on layer 2, for example, then we can look at the different assets we can see in that area. This one looks interesting. It's got vulnerabilities, critical listing to it. So we can obviously see the IP address, the MAC address, what it's doing. And then in terms of an individual asset component, get a summary of what it is. See the software that's being flagged on there, which network communication protocols, and any vulnerabilities that are on there, and kind of see what that vulnerability is. That kind of straight off the bat, just kind of getting the right sensors in there, ingesting that into an intelligence system, kind of goes a long way to kind of supporting that asset management view. Once you've got that, you can kind of understand, okay, which of those assets are kind of crown jewels for your organization, what the impacts if that kind of gets attacked, and what you might want to look at it. In terms of drilling down into that maybe a level further, if we look at the OT assets report. That says a blue team. There we go. Of course, again, we can kind of see different roles, the kind of different in terms of the different layers. Drill into there to see, and this kind of shows how the intelligence in the system has identified, what the role is, and kind of what it's doing in terms of session traffic, and that kind of goes a long way then to support not just seeing what's on the network, but what it's doing in terms of communicating with other things on there. So we'll come back to that, the views in there when we talk a bit more about compliance reporting, which is up next.
Yeah, I'll just add to what you just did there. Down that was excellent. The visibility into the vulnerabilities associated with the things on your system doesn't mean you're going to address every single one of those vulnerabilities, right? But using tools like this enables you to make decisions about what risks you're willing to take, and what risks you can delay, maybe till you can do an update later on because you can't address it right now. And you start taking a more proactive role to dealing with that, just rather than just waiting for a vulnerability report to come out and then reacting to it, right? So this tool gives you the ability to basically manage that risk and ultimately make things safer, right? So that's an excellent example.
Thank you. I mean, obviously risk is a big part of what's being kind of risk management, and is a big driver behind what we're seeing, particularly in the UK and the EU, in terms of the NIS2 and the cybersecurity resilience bill requirements. So it's going to kind of canter through that a little bit. So NIS2 is it's a directive. We have it doesn't kind of prescribe specific standards or tool sets, but it requires organizations to kind of evidence that they're doing the right things, that they've got the right processes in place. And in terms of asset management, it's key that they can demonstrate, what assets they've got, what they're connected to, and how the risks are being managed across that. Obviously, there's a wider piece around this too, but obviously it's been expanded to cover lots more industries in terms of that classified as critical national infrastructure, both in the EU and also in the UK. But all these kind of key things are, not just knowing what your assets are, but it's the criticality, who owns them if something goes wrong or there's an incident against it. Life cycle awareness is a key piece in terms of the extended life cycles of these own assets, and what their exposure, and what are they feeding in terms of doing detections. So the UK specific, it's very kind of the UK version of NIS2. It's currently making its way through Parliament, likely to come into a force regulation this year or next. But it's again, in terms of guidance, the actual framework to support that, I think, is going to be the cyber assessment framework from the NCSC. And in terms of that CAF framework, it's Objective A3, which applies specifically to asset management. So it's going to drill into that a little bit further before I kind of bring back the dashboard. But yeah, it's quite, what you have with the CAF is guiding principles and indicators of good practice. So in terms of getting the achieve status, it's not a checklist, but you want to be able to demonstrate that you're kind of using the indicators of good practice to give yourself the confidence that you're achieving the principles in the CAF, which again will help evidence what you need to do for NIS2 audits or the compliance audit. So let's just jump back to this page, and then we will look at compliance. So we've got a few things here to kind of show the examples. So let's see. So this is looking at obviously NIS2 requirements, got NCSE CAF requirements here. So this is, so we look at asset management. So here it's kind of obviously we've got the tick boxes in because we can demonstrate that we're kind of seeing the assets on the network, and then we've got the maps to the per new model, and that's kind of also kind of aligning that with the IEC 63443. Also in here, it's kind of of interest, NERC-SIP. So it's another one. It's kind of, that's obviously the more US focused framework, but kind of gives good detail and drill downs in terms of how you, in terms of how the information be provided.
And that's important to bring that as a U.S. standard, right? The U.S. this is all based on the power industry, right? So electrical generation and distribution is where that particular area comes in. We're actually behind in terms of the regulatory things that we're doing for critical infrastructure. The UK is ahead of that in terms of making it a requirement to do that, and that's both good and bad, right? Companies are kind of required now to do things that to spend money on these things and to bring these tools in, which is, from a cyber perspective, is very good. But I still have an opportunity, and we have an opportunity here in the U.S. to get out ahead of some of this stuff and put tools like this in place to be able to do way more than just what makes us compliant and actually bring us to real security, right? And we never want to confuse compliancy to a framework is actually being secure, right? It's the practices that go around that, the governance, things like visibility into what's going on within the system that then allow you to layer in things that really make you secure overall. And a lot of it comes down to people, right? It's always people, process, and technology that come together to make these things work. So, this is a great tool.
Yeah, so in terms of, we've got different frameworks, but if you go into the asset view, so you can see then on a per asset level what's contributing to your compliance scores and what's not. And if you don't have this, then you don't have the building blocks to be able to do that kind of compliance view. So getting the asset management really kind of tight under control is really key. I think there's one in terms of the next piece that really feeds, to kind of take a quick look. I mean, it's service maturity. If you kind of got your asset piece under control in terms of discovery, baselining, and all the alerting all checked off, you are in a good place. So with that, then we can, I think now's a good time to kind of summarize off that on the last slide. So obviously regulations coming through, it's going to target boards. Businesses need to kind of make sure they kind of got good responsibilities, decision making, etc. And the visibility is it's the underpinning of everything to support that. Ed, any last ones before I open up the Q&A?
No, this is how you start, right? This is the place where you really have to get an idea of what's going on. Any of these frameworks that you look at, the first thing that it talks about is making sure you know what's out there on the system. And that leads you to be able to then come up with the right strategies for mitigating the risks associated with what's out there. So that's a great place to start.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ed. Right, shall I guess stop sharing that and open up Q&A?
Thank you so much, both. That was really, really interesting. And we can tell that everybody joining us today hopefully felt the same as well, because we've had some really fantastic questions coming in the Q&A box as we've been going through. I will start in the, I guess, chronological order, the way in which the time frame that they came through in the Q&A box. Firstly, we had a question come through from Malcolm. Malcolm asks, I was interested in your slide inclusion of baselining. What I see in practice is a wide interpretation of baselining and what therefore needs to be done. How do we baseline?
Ed, how would you respond?
You want me to take that one? Okay. Once you have the visibility into what assets are out there, it becomes a matter of collecting data from the systems at the most trusted levels within the systems to really baseline what's going on. And that's why I kind of mentioned that a bottoms-up approach really is a great way to look at how to baseline. And I mean getting down to, if you can collect the analog and digital data from right at the level 0 and level 1 devices that are out there and use that information to both validate what the system's activities are doing at higher levels. So for example, if an HMI is reporting that a valve is open 100%, you should be seeing a 20 milliamp signal that corresponds with that down at the lower level. If you have that kind of data collection going on, then you can start to baseline what the system is doing on a normal basis, right? So that goes beyond just collecting network-based data in the OT world into really understanding what the physical processes are. So that can be done somewhat with historian data that's out there, but if you're really looking at it from a pure security perspective, having other sensors on the network that collect that data is useful because potentially a PLC could already be compromised, right? So it's really bringing in data from all levels of 0 to level 3, really, that come together to really give you a true baseline of what's happening in the environment.
So do you think?
Great. Thank you, Ed. I was just going to say, Dom, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I was going to kind of say, do we think there's, in terms of the a wide interpretation, maybe some people just look at the network traffic, and maybe some people look at types of assets. A PLCs, can't have a control from a certain other device or user within these timeframes. And if we see that that's outside the baseline, I guess is there a kind of, I guess what you've described as a modular framework to kind of start, with network topologies, assets, control, who's talking to who has what permissions, and kind of, I guess it's not easy to get that from day one. I guess it's probably an ongoing process and kind of continually doing that.
Absolutely. And, that goes to some of the things you were showing on the dashboard there, which is understanding how often things talk to other things on the network, how frequent are those things, and you can start to do frequency analysis. And this is, I hate to throw the AI term around loosely, but this is actually a good use for AI to be able to go in and allow it to look and train based on the data that's being collected within the system at the network layers and at the lower levels, and start to be able to build a baseline for what normal activity is within the system. So we have some new tools available to us to do that now, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming years or months in this case, probably.
Stay tuned for future episodes. We'll give you a show of what the dashboard can do. Anything else, Anna?
Yes, we've had a few more, but I appreciate that we're tight for time. So we'll see how we get on, and if we can't cover all of them, I'm sure we can follow up with everybody that's attended answers for these questions as well. But the second one we had in kind of links to what we were just talking about there. How do organisations typically gain accurate OT asset visibility when many environments rely on legacy or undocumented systems?
It's a combination of using tools to help you do that, and physical work of having to go down and track these systems down. I've been in environments where you go in and diagrams, like I said or before, are old and outdated and don't really represent what the systems are doing right now. So when my teams go in to start documenting those systems and really looking at a deeper dive of what's on the system, there are tools that you can use to put in place that feed like the dashboards that you're seeing right now, that can go in and either passively or actively look at what the devices are that are on the system, and actually start to pull out configuration information about how PLCs are configured, the switches and any firewalls and things that are in place, the network infrastructure that helps support those OT systems, and bring that into a common place, like the tool we saw just a few minutes ago, and apply the known vulnerabilities to those things and start to get some information out of it. But I tell you what, there's nothing like getting on site and actually walking things down, because I can give you numerous examples of where I'm walking through a plant and all of a sudden I see, look, there's like 2 Wi-Fi connections there that were added because some guy really wanted to be able to get access from his home into that particular part of the system that completely bypassed the rest of the whatever security might be in place for convenience sake. And the only way to get that is to really get in and dig into the systems and look at them from a physical perspective. So that's a great question. It's hard, especially on these older systems. It takes time.
Great, thanks so much, Ed. That kind of leads into the next question that we've had come through as well, which is, if patching isn't simple and you say it impacts operations, which we discussed earlier in the session, what are the most practical alternatives for reducing risk without disrupting overall operations?
So the way I recommend that people do that is to set up lab environments where they can you're never going to get a true digital twin of what these OT systems look like, but you can get pretty close to be able to bring things like patches in, and in that Purdue model, this would typically lie in the DMZ, right, where you bring in things from the outside world, right, patches and things like that. You want to scan them endlessly to make sure that they're not bringing in vulnerabilities associated with them. And then in the lab environment, you test operationally whether or not there's going to be any impact of making that update. And that can be a fairly complex lab to set up because you may have multiple vendors that you're dealing with in the OT world, right? You may not be standardized on one particular vendor's controllers. But with virtualization technology today, you can set up a pretty elaborate environment to be able to test things and test impacts before you actually go and apply something in the OT environment. And then it just really comes down to the process that you're trying to protect, because some processes are just more sensitive to updates than others, and are more sensitive to having only certain windows open that you can do these updates. So you try and get as much as you can done in those open windows that you have when you have the opportunity. But testing and scanning and doing it, not allowing direct access from the internet to your devices is probably a great place to start. So
that's great. Thank you so much, Ed.
There's no Patch Tuesday in the OT world, is there?
No. No, they try. Yeah.
And that kind of leads us on very nicely to the final question. Actually, I think we've just about got enough time to squeeze that one in. And that question is, from an IT security perspective, what are the most common mistakes made when applying traditional SOC tools to OT environments?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
I guess some things we wouldn't want to see in there is being over the top on containment, automated containment, and in terms of an approach to what to do when a critical threat is detected or something that looks very serious. I guess the processes that follow from that.
The incident response. That's a great point. I think that's that there is a big difference there, and you have to have plans in place with the appropriate. You have to include different kinds of people. It isn't just the IT people that you have to have involved in that response. You have to make sure the OT people are a critical part of that. And the only way to have done that is to get them working together before then, right? I see this. It's a great question because a lot of people try and reuse their IT SOC environments for their OT environment. And I don't recommend that. I recommend having a separate OT infrastructure, both in terms of a support perspective. I know that can be expensive, right? Because I'm saying you may have to have two groups of people, one to address IT and one to address OT. But that follows through all the way to the SOC as well. And incident response is a great example of where they're different, right? It also is different data that you're collecting. If you can do things like this baselining we're talking about, it's not that they're completely 100% different, because vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities, and these are networks ultimately, but they're networks being used in a slightly different way. So that's probably the best I can do on the fly.
I guess in the threat detection response, obviously, angle in the IT world, we're getting so many signals, and there's so much volatility and change in terms of. In cloud environments, you've got ephemeral assets that grow and shrink, and users come and go, and kind of a lot of software changing all the time. And you're kind of ingesting vast amounts of data. There's so many signals, so many alerts. Whereas what I've seen from the OT world is it's a lot more stable. There's lots of volatility. There's far fewer alerts that are generated, far fewer lots of logs that kind of cause events, so to speak. And so yeah, it's just generally things that are different from the baseline that kind of cause an alert for an analyst to investigate. So obviously the driver then in the IT world is to automate as much as possible and drive costs down and kind of focus on efficiency. But in the OT world, it'll always still focus on availability and safety. So nothing kind of will be activated without the proper process and people looking at it.
Absolutely, it's a great point.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much, both. That is all of our questions. So we managed to squeeze them all in. Fantastic work. Well done. And that is it for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for the first episode of this 4-part series. Episode 2 will be on in 2 weeks' time on the 5th of February, and we will be joined by Ian Henderson, who is the former VP at BP, the former VP of OT security from BP. And we'll be going over threat detection in that particular episode. So please join us there as well. Asset management was our foundation building blocks, and we are moving on now to threat detection in the next episode. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us today. All of your insights have been really, really valuable, and I'm sure everybody joining would agree as well. And thank you very much, Dom.